Okay, hi, I'm Miss Hottie. I teach at Olympian High School, and I made this video after a quick Google Meet with some of my students. This is the day before the AP World History exam, and they asked me for something that would be helpful for visualizing how to structure their essay. So this is not the most finished product, and I actually had to do a screencastify of the Google Meet recording in order to present this to my students, but I hope this will help you, and I'm going to also put this onto YouTube and attach a document that can give you a quick checklist that you can print out before the day of the AP test just to make sure that you have everything you need for your structure. So without further ado, I'm going to share the, again, unpolished Google Meet recording with you guys, and thanks to my students for giving their consent. You won't see pictures of them, but they, participate quickly. So here it is. This is how I think you should structure your AP test essay, and this is from the Google Meet recording that we did just a few minutes ago. What you guys just asked me is where should I put my FIA? And this is a question that's come up in all of my classes, so I'm going to answer that question, and I'm also going to talk about timing. First of all, the biggest problem with timing on the AP test is spending way too much time trying to think of the most perfect thesis. Don't do that. Spend the time first making sure you're answering the correct question, because that's the biggest problem. So draw out the question for yourself. Be like, are they asking me for causes, or are they asking for effects? Are they asking for changes? Make sure you're talking about the right place and the right time. Big mistakes that students make are confusing East Asia with Southeast Asia, or South Asia with Southwest Asia, also known as the Middle East. So first, make sure you're talking about the right place, the right time, the right question. Then, as you look at the document, there's only five. There's only five. If you take two minutes per document, that's 10 minutes. You've got plenty of time. As you look at each document, think about how can each document help me answer the question? And does it remind me of any other outside evidence? And can I source this document in a particular way and come up with your thesis? The only thing you really need in your first paragraph, that's definitely have to have, is a thesis. In a perfect world, you'd also have historical context. But that means that your first paragraph should be done quickly. All you need is a thesis. Now, the way I teach my students is different. I teach my students to do a historical context, a couple of sentences, then a thesis, then a grouping sentence. So if you were on the AP test, you could potentially make a Google document, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that right now to help you. You could even print this out, to try to think about what it would look like. So this might take me a split second to make this new document for you. And I'm just going to use abbreviations, and I'm going to make it really big print so you can see it. Okay, so the way you have to think about it is paragraph 1 is going to have historical context. Sometimes in class, I do historical context, or we can do CX. So historical context, that should be a few sentences. So maybe 1 to 3 sentences for historical context. Yeah? So that should be how you start. Now, you don't have to start. This isn't this isn't like the Word of God. You can have your own style. You can do it your own way. But paragraph 1, it should have historical context in it if you're in my class. Then you need a thesis. Make sure it answers the question. Do not start talking about effects if it didn't ask you about effects. Don't compare if it didn't ask you to compare. It says jump, you say how high. Make sure you're answering the right question. Then you want grouping sentences. And the reason you want that is because just in case you mess up on the thesis, you can potentially get it right on the grouping sentences. So that's paragraph 1. I'm going to go ahead and label that paragraph 1 so that you see. Then you've got your first body paragraph, but that's technically paragraph 2. You should start with a topic sentence that addresses part of your thesis. Now, by the way, your thesis should have about 2 parts because you only have 5 documents. You might be able to come up with a 3rd part, but I'd be surprised if you did. So if you have about 2 parts in your thesis, like it asked you for causes of World War I, which is not going to ask you because that's the wrong time period, then you have to say, oh, World War I was caused by this thing A, and thing B. So the topic sentence has to be about the first part of your thesis. Does that make sense? Say yes, guys that are on here. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, cool. So that's the topic sentence. And then you're going to want to bring evidence in. The evidence has to be from the documents. So let's just pretend you've got evidence from document 1. So you put in the evidence and then you tie it to your thesis. I have to come up with a better way to say this, but connect it back or elaborate or whatever. You need to act as if that evidence does not stand alone. You have to prove it. You have to basically argue. Argue that it proves your point. I should probably just say argue. Tie back to your thesis or argue how it proves your point. Proves your point or supports your thesis. Now, because your thesis is, your topic sentence is a part of your thesis. I don't like that this isn't fitting. I'm going to make it fit. So you've got one sentence that's the topic sentence, another sentence that's the evidence, then tie it to your thesis, then do it again with another. Oh, you could potentially source. And you can source in many ways, right? You could do sourcing by purpose, so that's the P and FIA. You could do sourcing by historical situation. You could do sourcing by intended audience, or sourcing by author's point of view. There's different ways we can do that. We can say happy. Other teachers say hip, or whatever they use. But make sure that when you say something about sourcing, you explain how it affects the document. This person is trying to convince you to vote for Republicans, which is why they say blah, blah, blah. Make sure that you connect it back to the document. I'm going to make this slightly smaller so it's not so awful to read. And I'm sorry if this is taking a little bit of time. So then you do that, and then you do the next piece of evidence. So you do this again, but now with a different document, Now I'm putting document 1, but it could be document 8. Actually can't because there's only a few documents. It could be. So you don't have to do them in order. It's like whatever document helps you prove that. So first you do one document, and then you do the other. You don't always have to do sourcing. Maybe you don't know what sourcing affects document 2. So once you've done that, you've done evidence from document 1, evidence from document 2, then think of outside evidence. Evidence that's not in the documents, but still helps you prove your point. And when you bring that evidence in, then see if you can still tie it back to the thesis. Now, some students might choose to do other things that you don't have to do, like add more historical context. They might choose to do things like make a connection to another time or place. They're like, oh, this is just like this other time when the Mongols did this thing. Or they might choose to add a historical thinking skill. A historical thinking skill, like, for example, if it's asking you about causes, but you can also do effects, maybe add that. Or if it's asking you about changes, but you can also do a continuity, add that. So that's what you're going to do in every single paragraph. I just did paragraphs 1 and 2. But now you can do this for every single paragraph. Now, if some students, they like to really make sure they get points for things. So what I see some students do is their entire second paragraph, instead of jumping in, is just about context. Because they're like, oh no, I'm going to get that point, right? So that's an alternative. It's an alternative way. I wouldn't necessarily do that. I like putting my context in the first paragraph, as you guys see here. Some students also choose to have a separate paragraph in case they have extra time that's just for outside evidence, or just for one of the additional thinking skills or connections. But you basically do the same thing in P2 for P3, for paragraph 3. You do that again, potentially for your next part, P4, and then you conclude. Your last paragraph, I'm just going to call it conclusion versus paragraph 5, because I don't know what paragraph it's going to be. Make sure you say your thesis again. You don't need to group again, but put your thesis again, and then make any connections to any other times or places, or do any kind of additional thinking skills, or why it's significant, why it's important for the next time period, which could be a really good place to do, again, historical context, because context is not just what potentially happened before the time period, but during the time period and after. Okay, so I hope that helps. Sorry that that wasn't the nicest potential video, but yeah, any questions that you guys have about that so far? Please ask your questions now, in that way I can use it to help the other kiddos.
Can you share the document with us?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording the video, and I'll share that with the whole class. But I will definitely share that document with you. And then, if you print it out, I don't know if you have a printer, or even if you write it on a separate little, one of these guys, a little notebook guy. Then when you're done with your essay, you can be like, oh, did I do it? Did I do my outside evidence? Again, you don't have to do things that way, but this is my suggestion for getting the most points. All right, this has been Miss Hottie. I think I forgot to introduce myself in case people forget who I am, and I'm going to stop recording you right now. Okay, so I hope that was helpful to you guys. I'm going to go ahead and send that via Google Classroom to my students, and I'm also going to have this published on YouTube with an attachment to the paper that you guys saw in the video. It'll be nice and clean. What you could consider doing is printing this out, or again writing it by hand and having it next to you on the day of the AP test, so that you're like, oh, okay, I remember to do this. I remember to connect it back. I remember to include outside evidence. You guys are going to do great on that AP test. Just hang in there, do your best. It's tomorrow at 11 a.m. and I know you've got it.